Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thank you, Jim.
Stewart, the Federal Court of Appeal says the Trans Mountain Pipeline cleared all the legal hurdles and the necessary hurdles to consult affected people along its route. Your opinion on the 3-0 court ruling in favor of the pipeline?
Yeah, I think we're hearing some of the groups that were supporting this lawsuit saying, well, we're not satisfied with that ruling. We're going to be appealing it to the Supreme Court. I say good luck to you. It's a 3-0, as you point out, Jim. It's unanimous. If there was maybe a 2-1 or some degree of uncertainty on this, I think there could be a greater chance the Supreme Court would deign to spend time on it. I think that reduces the fact that it's 3-0, reduces the chances of this happening, and also the fact that the law really is so clear, and the justices in their ruling, if you read through it, you can see that they are chirping about the fact that the uses that these groups are making of the court, repetitively going back again and again to relitigate the same questions over and over again. It's not just boring. It's the misuse of our court system, and it's not getting us anywhere. It's really just a tactic, and they use the word, the criticism of tactical use of the court system to try to stop a project for whatever reasons. And, you know, I must say it's confusing listening to some of the media. I was talking on CKNW radio. They had a professor from UBC Law School. He wasn't even talking about the supposed content and heart of this lawsuit. He was talking about climate issues. Climate's a real issue, but this is not what the lawsuit was about. It was about the duty to consult First Nations. Was an adequate job done by the federal government, by the proponents of the project, after they were instructed to do so by another court? Did they succeed in doing this? And the answer is yes, they did. I was in touch yesterday with a former Natural Resource Minister of Canada, Amarjeet Sohi. He lost his seat in Edmonton in October, part of that blue wave there, but nevertheless, I think he's a person of great integrity. He was saying he met with about 60 different First Nations in 2019 as part of this. And the company itself has noted that they talked to all 130 First Nations. That's an enormous amount of work. They went out there. Some First Nations said, you know what, we don't want to talk to you. They didn't respond. That's okay too. I mean, it's all different capacities that First Nations have. Some, like Squamish First Nation, are out there building condos and selling those condos to rich people and empowering their people that way. They can do that because they have land in Kitsilano and Metro Vancouver. If you're a little wee First Nation in the Fraser Valley or up in the Nicola Valley or along the pipeline route in more rural areas, you don't have the option to go and get into the condo development business and make yourself rich. And so I think it's maybe a little bit easier for some First Nations to oppose this because they've got options. And, you know, the thing we hear over and over again right now from the rising generation of highly empowered, business savvy First Nations leaders, people who I meet wherever I go nowadays, they're saying, get out of our way. We don't want your government handouts, or they're barely crumbs anyways. Get out of our way. We want to do things. We want to have agreements with industry that create our own source revenues. We want to create job opportunities, whether that's in all sorts of higher education areas, into trades, into professions. You know, get out of our way. And, you know, a lawsuit like this is something now it's out of our way. And the heartfelt desire among First Nations to do something will be realized. I got to say one more thing, Jim. I know I'm on a bit of a roll here, but I'm going to keep going. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to, because I got to say, look, the immediate response from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, which is the legitimate organization represented by the provincial government. It's part of the Leadership Council of First Nations, real organization for sure. but I'm going to say it's one with a very sharp and limited perspective when their representative, the leader they back for the leadership of the Assembly of First Nations, the national Canadian group of First Nations advocacy, when they put a candidate together, a very radical person, Rusty Abo, in the final ballot, he got but 1.9% of the ballots. The view that because of this court ruling, reconciliation is over, and now there will be this rebellion. Well, that's 2% of First Nations saying that. The 98%, Jim, who want to have a better life, who want their kids to have options that help communities get away from some of these horrible predicaments of poverty and abuse of different forms. This is something that they're real about. So when we hear this rhetoric, and I think the news media, my old friends, my colleagues in the news media, when they take this at face value, this is what the First Nations of Canada are saying in response to this ruling. Well, it's true. It's some First Nations, but it's not one block. It's as diverse as the whole population of Canada is.
How often do you ever see a 98% approval for anything?
Never, outside of North Korea.
Well, they're 105% vote in favor of the glorious leader.
Well, yes, tongue in cheek, obviously, but 98%, it never happens. And this project, do residents of Canada, of BC, want to see it? Yes, they do. I know there's been one pollster in the field saying, well, it looks like support is weakening. You know what? Last summer, when I made the pronouncement that there was very strong 60 to 65% support for the project, I only said that after seeing 3 or 4 different polls, and also my organization, ResourceWorks, we hired our own pollster. It was only after that, in June of 2019, that we were prepared to say, you know what? This is a strong majority supported project, and this is a good thing. I know there's one poll out there, someone's saying, oh, well, look, it's weakening support. You know what? I don't believe it.
Well, also, one poll can be horribly wrong.
Yep.
There is an error of or a margin of error here.
Sure there is. It's possible there's a trend down, I think, but I would rather wait and see on that because I don't think it's definitive at all. And not to knock that one pollster's method. I think they got a good one. Angus Reid, I do respect them, but it's only one poll. And an issue like this, I think there's going to be different questions, different audiences, different nuances to the polling methods that do affect what we see. And I think more than anything, it's not so much who loves pipelines. I don't think anyone, except maybe welders, love pipelines, I guess, and people who own them maybe love them. But the average person doesn't need or ever will love a pipeline. I think they need to be just sort of able to say, you know what, it looks like the people responsible have got this. I don't need to worry about it. I'm not out there holding a placard saying build it, nor am I out there saying, don't build it. I'm okay, because I got things to do. I've got a family to raise. I've got school to get to. I've got a job, and I think we're kind of at that stage now. You know what? It's been through, I've lost count. I think, is it 23 court actions? And, here we are. The law of the land, the parliament, the vast majority of our elected representatives do support this nationally. Of course, there's some weakness on that provincially, but I think even the NDP has kind of thrown in the towel. We heard that last week in Prince George. Premier John Horgan spoke to the resource industry gathered there for their annual conference, and the messaging was very different this time. It's, you know what, we're done with opposing it. We've gone into our toolbox as promised. We've got the tools out. We've tried to use them, and and you know what, those people can actually take a bit of a victory lap, because arguably, and I would argue this sincerely, they've made for a better project. If there were any weaknesses, the court system has served to identify the weaknesses, agree which ones really are weaknesses, which aren't, and compelled the shippers, the pipeline company to make sure that they're addressing these issues. And that's why all these additional conditions were added. So now, because of it, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, we have now got the best pipeline project in the world. They don't subject in Texas or Saudi Arabia or Russia their pipelines to the degree of scrutiny and improvement that this one has. And that's why it's very much defensible to see it as the best it could be. You know what? At some point, you got to say, this is a mission accomplished. We've got it. Let's do it.
The Supreme Court of Canada ruled 9-0 and made their decision in half an hour that BC did not have the right to say what is shipped in a pipeline because pipelines are under federal jurisdiction. Do you think people who think that the Supreme Court will even look at a 3-0 appeal court decision, are they misguided, and do they not understand how the legal system works?
Yeah, I think for the groups, some of the environmental groups, and I don't say this in any way to try to minimize or ignore the real genuine perspectives of the Squamish First Nation or the Tsleil-Waututh or the 8 different Stolo villages that were part of the lawsuit we're talking about, the latest one that's in the news, because that's authentic. I mean, there's so much pain in communities like that still has to be resolved. There's still so much to work through. You look at, for example, the Stolo in the Fraser Valley. There's one village there. They talk about Lightning Rock. This is a point on the map in Abbotsford where the legend has it. Actually, it's not legend. I think it's archaeological fact. There is a mass burial site at Lightning Rock, and there's a lot of concern amongst the local Stolo members about the fate of this should there be disturbance of that land, because their ancestors who died of smallpox due to colonialism are literally beneath the ground there, and that's who would not want their ancestors to be respected in anything that could happen there, and I was concerned about this issue because it was mentioned in the lawsuit, and I reached out yesterday to find out a little more about it. It seems as if the local First Nation and the Trans Mountain Company are talking about it toward a resolution, and it's not easy to work this stuff out, but they're going to do it. And I think yesterday was also visible to me that although a couple of the major Lower Mainland First Nations, the ones that we've heard most from, were indeed the ones at the news conference, but where were the Stolo? They weren't there. And also I noticed that, there's some misinformation. The leader of the Federal Green Party, Elizabeth May, she's also an MP in the local area, Saanich Gulf Island, who should know about this issue. She stated falsely on Twitter, I think this was just a mistake, nothing deliberate, but it shows the misinformation. She said that the Musqueam First Nation was part of the lawsuit. No, it wasn't. They've actually come out to say, we do not oppose the pipeline. They're constructively engaged with a technical working group set up for Indigenous issues that has been going through these issues to get it done right. And I think that's just representative generally of the I think low degree of information by even elected leaders. I think if you're going to open your mouth about it, if people have sent you to Ottawa, sent you to Victoria, for heaven's sake, get the facts right. And so much of what I hear, it's just not factually correct, and that's it's unacceptable.
Did most of the opposition come from Aboriginal groups that aren't on the actual pipeline route? And what do the nations along the pipeline route and on the pipeline route say about it? Yeah,
I mean, I think we have to respect the views of all First Nations, but for those who are directly on the route, and that's I hear the company quoting the number, it's like 40 or 50. If you're talking about all the way from Edmonton to the Salt Chuck, I mean, it's something like that. And I believe almost all of them. I think Coldwater doesn't have an agreement with them. That's one of the nations that was party to the lawsuit we're talking about today. But I believe that all the rest have some sort of impact agreements. There's a whole different bunch of instruments that they can reach for when they're trying to come to some agreement. It's not just one size fits all, but broadly speaking, call them Indigenous benefit agreements that enable access to services or revenues or training or different things. So these First Nations have been out there talking about it. In fact, there's a group, it's called Project Reconciliation. It's led by Delbert Wapas, First Nation individual who has a vision of Indigenous ownership of the pipeline as part of the path to reconciliation for First Nations, not just the ones all along the route, but the ones surrounding it. So when you see, there's a member of the Nisqually First Nation who's not not on the route, but I think it's been hired by Greenpeace. Canus Manuel, I often see her on Twitter with the most amazingly profane, outrageous statements. But this is a Greenpeace project, so I guess they're doing Greenpeace work. That's a person from a First Nation that's not even on the route. For First Nations on the route, when I speak to them, they feel as if they're the ones who should maybe have a little more say about it, because if it's on their traditional territory, or it's running across a reserve or land like that, then this is, very much a germane issue. I talked to Chief Michael Laborde. A lot of people may have seen him at this stage in time. He's been on Bloomberg BNN TV. I've seen him, I think, on CTV. He's out there talking because he, too, like Project Reconciliation, is leading or part of an Aboriginal investment group that wants to buy a chunk of the Trans Mountain Pipeline once it's expanded and once the feds sell it off, because they don't want to keep it forever, they say. And so when I talked to Chief Mike in his office in Whispering Pines First Nation north of Kamloops, he said, look, they need to keep the stuff in the pipe inside the pipe. If they do that, we're fine. And we want to make sure we're getting benefits from this. And so this is a very business-savvy, engaged leader and representative in that sense of so many of the leaders I meet these days, who's out there working every day very hard to be part of an ownership solution. I think what we're seeing right now is there's three groups like that. I've described two of them. I think what we're hearing in Ottawa a little bit is, let's not have, a situation where these groups are sort of having to get into conflict with each other. Maybe there's a win-win solution where everyone can, come into some structure of Indigenous ownership so that there's real equity, real revenues. And as anyone knows, I know there's a lot of investors who listen to your show, Jim. If you own a pipeline stock in your portfolio, you're probably doing it for the dividends, not so much the value. And that's what means revenues over the long term. So First Nations being able to have that long-term, reliable dividend revenue flowing in to help them improve the lives of their members, that's what it's all about at the end of the day, and that's now possible.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Aben Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Aben's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at abenresources.com.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, what about the hereditary chiefs who say they're against the natural gas pipeline in northern BC? Again, the First Nations along the route have voted in favor of it.
Yeah. The Coastal GasLink pipeline is carrying natural gas, and it's what will enable the LNG Canada project, $40 billion overall investment, all of these things, including the upstream side, to by 2025, start shipping cargoes of a cleaner form of fuel to markets where it's desperately needed. In Japan right now, they're building 22, New York Times reported this on the weekend, 22 new coal-fired plants in Japan are coming in because they had to shutter their nuclear fleet after Fukushima disaster. And so they want it as part of the mix. They desperately want natural gas. I've spoken with some of the company representatives from these giant conglomerates from Japan, and my goodness, they're desperate for Canadian gas. They don't want to depend on Qatar for natural gas only. I mean, they're getting diversified portfolios of fuel. And just a few years ago, and this happened a couple of times, I see the Qatar, interesting coincidence, Qatar, the country in the Middle East that produces just about the biggest amount of LNG in the world, is also the country where a news agency called Al Jazeera. Everyone's heard of Al Jazeera, right? It's a news agency They disseminate their news or propaganda all over the place. They've come a couple of times now to BC to do stories where they talk to the most radical, extreme voices from First Nations, portray them as being sort of the voice of Indigenous people of Canada and their opposition to these horrible oil and gas infrastructure projects. You know, they sent a journalist, Al Jazeera did, down the line in December of 2019, published this long piece about the horribleness of Trans Mountain. They went to the Greenpeace created voices of alleged Indigenous opposition. They did the same thing on the Coastal GasLink pipeline in the Wet'suwet'en territory. And hey, let me just say the Wet'suwet'en issues, like so many, are quite unique. You can't say, okay, the governance of hereditary and elected chiefs in all parts of BC is the same. There's 200 First Nations. They're really all different, and you cannot generalize about it. So just something to be cautious about when one views this. But there's Al Jazeera talking about interviewing people who, propelled by external groups, started to build structures a decade ago on the Coastal GasLink, the GPS coordinates of the pipeline through a very tight geographic area. I mean, there's really no other way you can go. Very little room to move. And they did that, and they're on record saying this in Al Jazeera video to stop the pipeline. So here we are, the world's biggest exporter of LNG, Qatar, is sending its propaganda people to Canada, enjoying our democratic press freedoms, to create this incredibly damaging and often false propaganda about our oil and gas industry, when really we're the best in the world in terms of distributing equitable freedoms through our society, in terms of the general freedom of society. Canada or Qatar, who are you going to pick, Jim? Well, I know who I'd pick. So that's a lot of what the public sees. So people on Facebook, they see this, how to stop a pipeline video from some source. They don't look at it. They just sort of see the images and words, and they form this impression. And that's how, I think, often naive we can be in Canada. But I'll tell you what, I was in Prince George last week, Jim, and I interviewed the granddaughter of hereditary chiefs from the Wet'suwet'en. And it so happens that this individual, she was interviewed in media. I did a video interview with her as well. Most insightful young woman, Candace George, and she explained things to me in more balanced terms. And I think her First Nation actually is supportive of the opportunities that come from a responsibly approved natural gas pipeline, and is saying so. You know, they're along the same corridor, and also are from Wet'suwet'en. You know, that's a large grouping with quite a number of different clans and local interests attached to it. So all that the media and the world see is one, actually maybe two individuals who've got a few others who've come around them who claim to represent groups. There's 20 First Nations, 20 on the Coastal GasLink that have voted in favor of it. They've gone to their people. These are elected, democratically representative people who say we're First Nations and we want the pipeline. And then there's a handful joined by a lot of outsiders, many of them not Indigenous. I mean, you can plain to see who are trying to thwart Canadian law and the interests and wishes of local residents who are First Nations. So that's a state of play in 2020. I think, broadly speaking, it's become a communications conflict. And, of course, it has legal dimensions and environmental dimensions. And, yes, climate policy is an important part of this. And the nub of it is that, look, these projects have been improved. They've sustained their support all through the legal and regulatory structures we've got. So let's build them.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. The Teck Frontier mine has received regulatory approval. Is this project going to go ahead? And by the way, where is that?
Yeah. So Frontier is up in the oil sands of northern Alberta, Athabasca tar sands, the Alberta oil sands, and the project is, I think, what in certain measures one of the biggest ever. It is not going to be built, if it is built, until later this decade. But the company Teck Resources, which is based in downtown Vancouver, at Bentall 5, they've invested a significant amount of time over the years and obviously a lot of money to go through the regulatory processes. Amazingly, here's a project that has been approved not only by the regulators of the province of Alberta, where it lies, but also the federal regulators. The new CEA, the Canadian, or CER, Canadian Energy Regulator, has reviewed this project. They've said it's fine. I mean, they don't say this lightly. It takes I think it was 8 years in the process, 7 or 8 years before it got approved. So this is a project that's got support of all of the First Nations where it's located, who want it, who see the economic benefits of it. You have the by now well-established value of Canadian heavy oil in the global marketplace. I know there's a little cottage industry, people who like to dismiss and try to diminish and disparage Canadian oil from the oil sands, but the fact is it's used by refineries. It's used for a huge number of different applications that light oil or lighter oils are not as well suited for. So this is a commodity that is needed over time. I mean, you think about a 40-year mine, and that's what we're talking about here. It's going to generate, you'd have to look up the exact number. I think $20 billion springs to mind in terms of the investment required. And then they have to spend that much again to maintain it over the next 40 years. So it's a huge amount of continuous investment. One of the cool things about the oil sands mining is that once you build it, it's built. Whereas if you're drilling for oil, like they do in Texas or Saudi Arabia, you're just always drilling, especially in the fracking, the shale of the Utica in the northeast USA, or down in Permian or Eagle Ford in Texas, Oklahoma. Drill constantly, because those wells that you drilled are diminishing as soon as they're active, and so you've got to keep drilling. An oil sands mine is different. You identify the site, you know what the deposit is, and then you just simply mine that site. It's much easier on the environment in that sense, and it's something that is predictable for investors. And also the other thing about it is, and we've seen this recently in 2019 as companies like Cenovus and Canadian Natural Resources really began to talk about the progress they're making in lowering emissions on the upstream. You're able to improve your processes because you've got this sort of in situ operation. You're able to analyze every part of your industrial process and apply best practices to it. Obviously, lowering costs is a huge driver of innovation in the oil sands because profitability, especially when you see, like right now, we've got Western Canada Select. It's been hammered down because of the industrial slowdown in China that's affecting oil prices. So you want to be as competitive as possible when you hit patches like this, so that your costs are allowing you to be profitable. And so that's really been the story of the oil sands for the last 6 years since the 2014 meltdown, and it's at the end of the day been good for the oil sands. And that's why a project like this, I like it so much. I like the Frontier oil sands mine because we're in this era of sort of hyper efficiency across the processes, and we've got an acceptance by industry that, you know what, we need to get to net zero. I'm not even sure exactly what that means in practice. I don't think anyone is, even those who say they are, but let's accept that having extractive processes that are less emissions intensive is a worthwhile thing to go for, and indeed we will see industry compelled to go for that. So imagine you're sitting around in Ottawa at the cabinet table. Even though we have this regulatory system that advises, they still kick it up to the cabinet, Trudeau's cabinet, to make the final decision. That's what's happening now. Probably within the scope of the current month, we will see a decision reached. I think they've telegraphed that they want to see some sort of, visible, tangible progress on lowering emissions in the upstream. Fine. Teck has said we're going net zero by 2050. We got this. So that's good. Seems like, there's some good play between the parties there to make sure that they can get to a good outcome. So if you're sitting in cabinet, you're on the hook for this, yes or no. Where are you going to go on it? I think they're going to go to yes because they've seen the progress they need. They probably think that they don't need the whole province of Alberta deciding to go to war with the rest of Canada over this, because believe me, I'm spending a lot of time in Alberta these days. I'm tasting a sense of fractiousness under the surface that is ready to explode if the Ottawa decision is not a reasonable, rational one. Then all of this Wexit stuff that we've seen is going to explode. And right now, the hardest hit are families, the hardest hit are young people, young men out of work. You look through the annals of history, you want to find areas of revolution and instability. It's when you have a lot of young people who are frustrated and have no options. And I think it's very important to this civic order of Canada that the Trudeau government finds a way to get this project going, because it's just a very dark mood right now. But we can get to a better place with good leadership.
Stewart, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. His Twitter handle @SJMuir, his website, resourceworks.com. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.